Welcome, everybody. Hello and welcome to the Internet of Water Coalition webinar series. Today we have a presentation from the Western States Water Council on the Water Data Access and Analysis Tool, or WestDAAT. That's what we're calling it. That's the acronym. And WestDAAT is a data platform that is a part of the Western States Water Council Water Data Exchange Program. I am Faith Sternlieb, and I am hosting today's Internet of Water Coalition webinar. I am Associate Director of Engagement for the Internet of Water Initiative at Lincoln Institute of Land Policy's Center for Geospatial Solutions. Before we get started, I'd just like to cover a couple of housekeeping items. We are recording the webinar today, and the recording and presentation slides will be available on our website, the IOW Coalition website, after the webinar, and also on the IOW YouTube channel, so you can look there as well. If you'd like to refer back to anything you heard today in today's webinar, if you'd like to share this webinar with your friends or colleagues, you will be able to do that. We usually post about a week after the webinar. We'll also be taking questions throughout the webinar, so if you have a question at any point, please drop it in the Q&A, and we will go through the questions after the presentation. If you have any technical issues, please put those in the chat, and we'll try to get whatever issues you're experiencing fixed as soon as possible if we have control over that. So now on to the main event. We have Tony Willardson here. Welcome, Tony, Executive Director of the Western States Water Council since 2009. Tony oversees the Western States Water Council Water Data Exchange, or WADE program, and we'll be giving a brief introduction about the council. We also have Adil Abdallah, who is Water Data Exchange Program Manager and lead architect of WADE 2.0 system, the data system. He will be giving an introduction to WADE, the Water Data Exchange, and WestDAAT, the Water Data Access and Analysis Tool. And then we will hear from Ryan James, who is a data analyst and hydroinformatics specialist for the WADE program. And he will be giving us a live demonstration of WestDAAT and showcasing examples of how it can be used. Afterwards, we will have time for Q&A. So with that, I give the floor to you, Tony, and Adil, if you'd like to share your screen.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Faith. Thanks, Adil. So I'm just going to give a very brief introduction to the council itself, who we are, what we do, and why we got involved with WADE. So we are a government entity created by the Western governors in 1965 to advise them on water policy issues. Our members are appointed by the governors. We represent 18 states. We continue to work closely with the Western Governors Association. And we also strive to provide a collective voice for our member states, as well as foster state-to-state and federal-state collaboration. And I would just mention briefly that we work with what we call our federal agency support team, which is 12 different federal agencies that have signed a point of contact to work with us. And we have a federal liaison on detail remotely, Madeline Franklin, who's with the Bureau of Reclamation. So next, Donald. The mission of the council, as given to us by the governors, was to ensure that the West has an adequate, secure, and sustainable supply of water of suitable quality to meet our economic and environmental needs now and in the future. Next. And as we all know, water in the West is an increasingly scarce and precious resource. And despite the record year that we are having with regard to snowfall and rainfall and atmospheric rivers, it's going to be some time before we ever refill the major reservoirs on some of our river systems. Next. I'm not going to read through this whole slide, but our members, many of our members, are the so-called state engineer or the director of the Department of Water Rights or Water Resources, those that are responsible for allocating water in the West. So as far as a state granted right to the use of public waters, We use this to include both public and private appropriations, permits, allocations, allotments, and reservations. But I'd note that we will not be presenting data on federal reserve rights or tribal reservations. So there are many different attributes of a water right that are included, and Ryan will demonstrate as part of our WestDAAT tool. But these usually include attributes such as the owner, the point of diversion or withdrawal, the place of use, the purpose of that use. There may be a limit on the flow rate or the quantity consumptively used. And sometimes there are customary water duties. And it's also very important to understand that these rights are given a priority date. And without going into a lot of detail on the prior appropriation doctrine in the West, many of you have heard the refrain, first in time, first in right, or in other words, the first person to attain a right to put that water to beneficial use has the senior or priority right over subsequent users. I'd also note that the appropriation doctrine prohibits waste and also protects these senior users from injury. There have been adjustments to recognize both consumptive and non-consumptive uses, and that consumptive water use is very important as it relates to irrecoverable losses that may be involved due to conveyance losses, evaporation, crop evapotranspiration, or other depletions. And I would just note that many domestic wells are exempt from requiring a state water right, but may have a flow right. And there are other doctrines for water use in the West, particularly as it relates to groundwater, such as the correlative rights doctrine, where every landowner shares a part of the water source. Next, Donald. I just want to make this note from one of our current members, Joaquin Esquivel, who's chair of the California State Water Resources Control Board. He's noted that reliable water data is almost as critical to farmers and water managers as the water supply itself. Next. And that brings us to our water data exchange program. This was initiated beginning with some funding made available in 2009 and was overseen by the Western Governors Association. And it's for the past 12 years, we've been developing the data and then moving towards a tool to help visualize this data. Again, we're talking about state data, and we'll hear a little more about that from Adel and then Ryan. Adel, go ahead.
Thank you, Tony. Let me see, where is the camera? Have too many. Oh, there you go. Okay. Yeah, thank you, Tony, for the introduction. We really appreciate your expertise. 40 plus years with the council and knowing so many people, both at the states and federal level, has been extremely helpful for us here as we work with data. I got involved with WADE back in 2017. I was an intern, a grad student trying to access water use data, and was having some challenges trying to access data across state lines. And Sarah Larson, the previous program manager, was like, oh, why don't you come and work for us and help us at the time? So it got me super excited about this idea of enabling regional analysis to inform water resources planning and policies across state lines in the West. And so we're focused on making states' water data fair, so findable, interoperable, accessible, and reusable. And we're going to demonstrate each of these components in the demo and as I explain the approach of WADE. And so here's the architecture of WADE 2.0, which we started in 2019. And Ryan James, my colleague who will present in a few minutes or demo the actual tool, worked so hard on harvesting states' public water rights data. And I'm going to explain the types of data we work with, but this architecture works for the 4 data types that I'll explain in a minute. And so we harvest that data from publicly available. And we put these different shapes and colors here to represent the different structures and terminologies that the states use. And Ryan writes this really nice, elegant Python code to harvest that data, move it to a consistent format and template in WADE CSV files. It took us a decade to get this point, to have this common schema. And once it's there, we have an IT contractor that built a data uploader to a centralized database in the cloud, Microsoft Azure. And then it becomes basically available through code. So researchers can write code to access that data through an API, a public one. And we realized over the years that we needed a user-friendly interface that allows this regional analysis across state boundaries. And that's the focus of the webinar today. And we're super excited about that. And there are two logos here for USGS and EPA. And that's a demonstration of the interoperability of our data or the state's data with these two federal agencies as an example. And I'll explain the logic behind that. All the system is on GitHub. It's open source and free and accessible. So here are the 4 data types that we work with and has been like the goal for WADE to share for our member states. Water rights, which is the focus of this webinar, and we're calling this stage 1 of WestDAAT. Ryan will show, we have 17 states sharing that data in both in the database through the API and in WestDAAT, the front end. In the second stage, and Tony explained those, the attributes of water rights, and Ryan will show those, so I'm going to skip there. And so the second stage, which we've also been working on for a while, and so we're hoping that we would add these to WestDAAT, most of them in the WADE database, that would require some expertise to access those data. And so state regulatory overlays, these are any geospatial boundaries that the legislature or river basins managers would implement to close appropriations, like in surface water or stopping surface water diversions in a basin, like the Great Salt Lake Basin, groundwater management areas and districts, interstate streams and compacts. So all these different geospatial layers, we're working on those. We have 5 in WADE. We're hoping to add that to WestDAAT. Site-specific time series withdrawals. So these are 3 categories, and Ryan will show a couple of demos for those. USGS has stream gauge network, but the states themselves, they do have an extended, whether seasonal or year-round gauge stations that measure flow across the West. There's an exciting prototype. We'll show that. We have that for 10 states, but not yet in WestDAAT. Public supply, a city, where it gets its water, how much over time they use. That's another exciting prototype that Ryan will show. And then I think that one of the most important aspects of water rights data is looking at the historic withdrawals that the water users reported to the states. And we have 2 states, California and North Dakota. They have their data available. We need to include those in the database and then later in WestDAAT. The 4th data type that the states also do water budget. They have models that do water budgeting at different geospatial areas like counties and HUCs and river basins. And we share that data, and we have another prototype for that data. Water rights is the fundamental data that basically it's our contract with nature and how in a sequence, who could use water when it's available. And then all these different data types, they support planning and analysis where water is being used and so forth. Besides working with the structures of data, we introduced WADE data terminology or WADE terms. We keep the native ones, and then the prominent example that we give here, that the states have over 380 unique beneficial use terms that you could put water to legal beneficial use. We narrowed them down to 21, and Ryan will show that. Water source types and site types, other examples. Another prominent example is the legal status of a water right. And the states have close to 150 unique terms. We're still working on that. We're thankful to our legal counsel here and the legal committee with the Western States Water Council. We narrowed them down to 83 unique terms that indicate that those water rights have the permission to be used, and 66 that they can't get, they don't have the permission due to different reasons. I'm not going to get into right now. We've envisioned, as we were designing the system, these 6 distinct personas. Just checking on time here. And envisioning in how the system could be used from their different perspectives and roles. And we have this document that lays out all these details. For the interest of time, I'm going to jump into the slide. It shows the logos or the organizations that we involved in early testing and demonstration and soliciting their feedback prominently, like the Bureau of Reclamation Commissioner, Camille Tutin, and USGS leaders, and the Western Governors Association, and others, and individuals and organizations even not listed here. As I said before, our data is interoperable, so we bring states data into the WADE system, and we also make it interoperable or searchable by other data systems like this GConnects, which is a very ambitious project to connect states, both states and federal data geographically together. And it provides persistent identifiers to those landing pages for each water feature and links them together. And Ryan will show an example to that. There's the NLDI, which is the Hydro Network Linked Data Index. It's an amazing tool. Ryan will demo that too, that allows you to search for data upstream or downstream in a watershed. We're super thankful to our state agencies who have staff dedicated their time to work with us, the entire 18 states, and a lot of philanthropic funding and federal funding, notably recently the Applied Science Grant by the Bureau of Reclamation, and then other partners. We're really thankful for their help here. As you we'll share the link after the demo to WestDAAT, and we'd appreciate you by sharing feedback that would help us make the case, continue to make the case that this system is being used in different contexts and regions. And so there's a button for feedback. As you use it later on, please click at that button and share any feedback. We'd appreciate that. Thank you all. I have a mural whiteboard. I hope that many of you are familiar with. It should be easy to use. No login is required. I'll put it in the chat. You could add feedback there as well. And I'm gonna now turn it to the more exciting part of the webinar, to Ryan, to demo WestDAAT, and then a couple of the prototypes that would we're visioning for the second stage of WestDAAT. Ryan, I'll turn it to you.
All right, my name is Ryan James. I have the pleasure of actually doing the live demo of the launch of WestDAAT today. I'm just going to share my screen real quick. Otto, can I get a thumbs up? You're seeing my screen?
Yes, yep.
Perfect.
And that's the whiteboard.
Correct. I just wanted to make the quick comment. We're going to share a link to our mural whiteboard. If you feel free for our remote guests to access this and just to click on anywhere and leave a comment today for the WestDAAT tour or the presentation. This isn't optional, and it's just for feedback for our purposes. So today I'm going to do a live demo on the Western States Water Data Access and Analysis Tool, or WestDAAT. This is the front application to the cloud database of the Water Data Exchange program hosted by the Western States Water Council. What you're looking at right now is the accumulation of all the work we've put in the last couple of years. Particularly, we're looking at the accumulation in our system right now of over 2.5 million recognized water rights throughout the Western states here, spread out between 2.5 million sites. That's about 2 million point of diversions and 500,000 places of use. A point of diversion is what we identify as the withdrawal location, and the place of use is the connected place of use for a water right in particular. Today, I'm just going to go over how individuals and users can use our tool and access all the data we've done. Particularly, I'm going to bring to interest, if you have any questions, we post all of our feedback here on our hamburger menu here, particularly where our data is coming from, and all of the information we work with is publicly available information hosted by our state agencies. You can find direct links to where the source data was, where we are processing it and importing it into WADE, and you can find questions like that. In addition, we have a known issues. Water data on this scale is going to have a few hiccups. Trying to force data sometimes into a one-to-many relationship does have some complications, and we try to post anything we are currently aware of the data in our knowns issue. In addition, we have our FAQ posting and our feedback here. We will release this link later today, and we hope everyone enjoys the hard work we put in for the last couple of years. So I'm just going to work through a couple of use cases of why someone would want to use this online tool. Right now, we're looking at the accumulation of about 700,000 recognized water rights. Particularly, we're looking at agricultural rights spread out to the western states. Here, I just popped up a quick analytics for the site, looking at those 7,000 sites of agricultural. These are very high flow values for acre feet and volume. I do want to iterate that these are the paper water rights hosted by the states themselves. And keen eye observers would note when I said that we have to sometimes work with a one-to-many relationship. Sometimes a state-issued water right will assign a flow for multiple sites. And unfortunately, we duplicate those volumes sometimes in our system due to the relationship of the state's data. The data we work with is as good as the states can provide us at this time. And it is an ongoing relationship and partnership we have with the states to continually clean up their data and to provide it on this cross-regional analysis tool that we hope more users will get the use of. So I'm just going to work through those use cases here. We're looking at all of the known agricultural sites throughout the West. We have a few built-in filters here, so we can look at individual points, particularly those point of diversions, which tend to be represented by dots. Places of uses we recognize as polygons or both. We also, as a water right, we try to track the flow and volume. That depends on what the state provides us. And these are tools that will highlight sites that tend to have either a high assigned flow value or a high assigned volume value, or just a default where keep it is. Working through our assigned filters, we do our best to make sure everything is accessible. We're looking at beneficial uses right now, but we can expand upon that. I'm just going to expand upon the use case of a individual water right wanting to find more specific water uses. I'm going to add livestock for an example here in all these blue sites. That's a little hard to see, so I'm just going to change the background color to make those pop out a little more. And I'll add one more beneficial use here, and I'll add public supply rights. These are the WADE identified beneficial uses. We have identified 386 recognized uses across the state. We shrink that list down a little bit for filtering reasons like that, but we do preserve the state's terminology as best we can. Everything we record in our database is the state data. We're just trying to do it on a regional analysis preview. If I pop out those analytics tabs, these will update with the number of rights along with the accumulated flow and volume of those additional sites. This is just an example of those 3 public uses, but in all, we have about 21 recognized uses. I'm just going to reset all those filters, and we'll slowly see that map populate again with 2.5 million sites. The technology we use is using OpenStreet's vector tiles. It's a little quicker than using a raster file. It does help us address the challenge of trying to map 2.5 million sites on a site. Obviously, we're not seeing 2.5 million here, but as you zoom in, they tend to start to pop out more. There we go. You're really starting to see that map populate. And this work, I do want to thank our contractors for helping us overcome that step of trying to get that many sites populated on a single map at a time. As far as we are aware of, no other individual has been able, no agency has been able to populate this many sites on a single web portion at this time. I'm going to pause for quick questions if Tony or someone wants to bring something up. And if not, I'm just going to bounce on to more unique use cases we feel like this will really help a user with.
Ryan, do you want to explain some of those blank areas on the map where we don't have data at this point?
Sure.
Such as you can see the livestock in Wyoming, but has very few sites at this point.
Sure. So our data is the publicly accessible data. All water right data is technically publicly accessible. Some states do a little better of making that machine readable. The data we work with in those links is either through a online GIS service, online tables, CSV files, open API networks, or sometimes they're just email correspondence asking the local organizations if we can have access to these files for this cross-regional analysis. Sometimes that doesn't always work super great. In the case of Wyoming, there are some missing livestock data. That information is available through Wyoming through personal correspondence. In addition, we are still in the ongoing efforts of working with non-state recognized data, this time like tribal information water right data. We can see a big gap here in this corner, and Arizona is a perfect example of missing water right information currently in tribal, that we are ongoing efforts to try to get that into the WADE system.
And that's the Navajo Reservation.
Correct.
Thanks, Ryan.
All right, I'm seeing a few questions pop up. I'm just going to work through a few cases here, and then we'll try to address questions as best we can. So I'm showing the example of just looking at all the water rights across the state, but now I want to work through more unique examples, particularly the ability to do some cross-regional analysis in particular areas. If I was a river basin manager wanting to know agricultural rights with a priority date before, I believe, 1922, which was the river compact in the Colorado River Basin, and I wanted to find those rights that were going to be impacted for a call to use, or particularly the rights that had the most flow, we allow such a thing like that. I'm going to use preloaded examples in interest of time, but I will work through those as best I can. Here is the example of that use case of where I've selected all of the agricultural water rights in the upper river Colorado River Basin using the few filters we have. All I've done is size it by flow. I've selected the states I know that are in the upper Colorado River Basin. I selected the agricultural beneficial use. I selected, these are surface water records, by the way. And in this case, I've done a preloaded Colorado River Basin. All of these points are geo-referenced. We have a few key examples of river basins. We are going to expand this list further in the future with better examples. We are also exploring ways for users to do user-specified shapefiles with an upload. If any of the use cases here are not to what anyone is looking for, we also support drawing tools where an individual can just simply draw a polygon over their sites. I've also searched for a priority date no later than 1922 in this example. So as part of making it easier to narrow down water rights, paper water rights in a specific region, as part of the WestDAAT program, we also want to make sure we're making information easier to find for individuals. In this case, I want to take a look at this larger green area and find out more about it. We do support what we call native landing pages for a water right. In this case, I'm just going to pop up that example. And we're looking at what is the Western States Water Data and Access Tool landing page for this recognized water right. This is a Utah water right with a assigned flow of about 94 CFS with a recognized use in irrigation, but also domestic, municipal, and stock watering. Published date, that's a recent date. I did a lot of cleaning lately, so that's why that's fairly recent. But a priority date of 1881. The general location right here, we can zoom in to see those. In this case, this is a good example of a water right being assigned to two different points of diversion. The same paper water right applied to two different places. In addition to our own water right data, we do our best to make sure we're linking to the source data by the states. Here is the native landing pages for that water right in Utah in particularly of that 1881 priority date, 94 CFS in Muddy Creek. After a series of searches like that, as I demonstrated, we do allow the exporting of data. Whoops, I'm not signed in here. But with a simple the online tool is free and available for everyone. The idea is just to promote regional analysis and looking for water rights. We do ask that if you're interested in downloading your selection or any of the data, that we do ask you to do a sign up for us. That's just so we can keep track of who's downloading our data. and it's just a symbol of the download data button. We do have some limitations currently on the amount of data that can be downloaded, but that is a flexible number at this time, more related to the infrastructure resources we've been trying to wait. The bigger the server, the more data we can allow download, things like that. I'll do a quick
Ryan,
pause.
if you don't mind, I jump in here. Do you mind going back to the landing page, the example you were showing?
Sure.
I wanted to highlight the method description and one of the critical points we want to make, that states have different water rights administration systems, and they have the data might have different limitations. And so we made sure to share the disclaimer and what the state provided about their water rights data set. And so we would like each user to pay attention to those method descriptions. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to move on. Go ahead.
Ryan, there was a timely question about the frequency of data updates and caching.
Sure, so good observation. Right now, all of the data we're working with is technically static files. We are just exiting our exploratory analysis phase of developing WADE 2.0 and WestFast. The long-term goal is to take advantage of state resources, online resources, particularly online API, and to renew this data as often as we are comfortable doing within our own infrastructure. About maybe a week or a month was the original thought. The good news is water right data doesn't change too frequently on a day-to-day basis, so this data is pretty well up to date. We do our best to try to keep in touch with our state partners to make sure nothing has changed too dramatically. I also highlighted earlier that sometimes the data is not publicly accessible as others, so we are not able to make that automatic retrieval 100% at this time. But water right data, to our best of our knowledge, is pretty as up to date as we can keep it.
Hi, Ryan. Wanted to make sure that you were finished with the presentation and we can open it up for other questions, or did you have other use cases that you wanted to go through?
We have one more big tool I want to show off as
Great.
part of a partnership, and then we'll start
Awesome.
building use cases. So I'm going to go back to that and just reset that.
Nice.
And that'll make my computer explode as I load all those sites back in. But the one I wanted to really highlight here is the NLDI. This is the National Linked Index project, where in addition to recognized geolocated water rights produced by us, we're partnering with other organizations, particularly the USGS and EPA, to highlight the ability to find all site information within a given area. We're the ones looking at geolocating paper water rights in cross-regional analysis, but USGS also provides streamflow data, and EPA does water quality, particularly in a sites. The intent of this is to essentially look at any river basin, any area, do a quick drag and drop of a tool, and in that river basin, show me all of the recognized WADE water right sites, USGS stream gauge sites, or water quality sites within upstream of that area or downstream of that data. Again, I'm going to use a preloaded example in the interest of time, but here is an example of looking at the Bear River area in the northern Utah, Wyoming, and Idaho area, where I picked a landing point right here with a simple drag and drop, and we can see that downstream, I forget the location, I forget the distance we're currently doing at. I think it's about 5,000 meters, Otto. Please correct me if I do that wrong.
Yeah, 500 kilometers, so about 310 miles.
500 kilometers downstream of that point of all of the recognized WADE water rights and the USGS gauge sites and EPA water quality, in addition to all of these sites upstream of that currently feeding into that tributary. These sites do work with our filters, so I can turn off some of these. I'll turn off the WADE and US EPA sites right now. Oops, I'll turn those views back on. And that's a quick show of all of the USGS sites. We're not hosting this data, but this is all accessible to an API. And so it is easily defined. Here's an example of a stream gauge between the Idaho and Utah border, in addition to a link to where the USGS is hosting that stream gauge data. And I'll finish this with just a quick example of our own filters for water right data also work on this information if I just wanted to break that down to a agricultural irrigation. As it painfully reloads there, and there we go. There's all of the agriculturally recognized water uses within that river basin tool.
Ryan, if you don't mind, I'm going to jump in here quickly. One of the cool applications of this tool, at least from the technical perspective, is water shepherding, meaning there have been discussions in this example here in the Great Salt Lake, and the Bear River is one of the major tributaries. If we save water upstream and we want to let it flow downstream to the Great Salt Lake, how do we ensure that the senior water right holders downstream of that saved water wouldn't take that water as like a natural flow? And so this tool, at least from a technical perspective, can show all the, you can filter it as you like, but you can see all the folks who are sitting in line downstream who could potentially take that water and notify them. And then, I don't know, Ryan, if we showed that table, not the pie chart, the one next to it. So this one, thank you. This one gives you a summary, and it's more useful as you narrow down the scope of the search, but this one gives you a summary of who are the top owners. For example, here, you can see the Salt Lake City Corporation, Clark Water Company. So if you narrow them down and look at certain water users that you could say, notify, reach out to, that's one of the applications of this NLDI tool, to look for upstream or downstream, both diversions, and then as you highlighted, Ryan, USGS gauge stations showing the actual flow in the river. Thank you.
I'm going to take a minute here to try to address some of the questions in the QA. Let's see, I think we address the first question there. The second question from Jason is there a way to associate data quality flags with data that has known issues? Specifically, is there a way to have the system show these flags with the data is access to ensure the user is informed? So the data we work with is as good as the states make publicly accessible. We do a lot of back and forth with the states to make sure that the data we work with is going to be essentially as accurate as we can get it. We also make sure we're doing the promise of we're not replacing the state data or the state infrastructure on their own systems. We're just trying to support different approaches on how to use it, particularly that cross-regional analysis approach. Every state wants to know what their neighbors are doing, but they don't want to host their neighbors' data to do that, and that's where we come in to do that. We do offer, I highlighted on that earlier, that we do offer links to where the data particularly is coming from and how we're breaking it down to fit it into our system. But that at this time, that's as close as we're getting to quality flags at this time.
Ryan, Ryan, actually, do you want to point out to where you were at the GitHub as an example? I think there are two, the answer can be twofold. One is the quality and the processing you do, and you kick out some of those data that do not meet our key requirement. Like, if, for example, well, do you mind sharing some of those examples?
Sure, I can give some examples. We'll go over California here as an example, where here is the link to where our mapping processing. This is going over where we're getting the data and how we prepared it to fit into WADE. In this case, California gets into trying to fit apples and oranges all into the same square hole, unfortunately. California does not always recognize a priority date in their water right. There are riparian water rights that are exempt on information like that, and we do make those noted exemptions. But sometimes appropriated water rights are missing a priority date. And unfortunately, with our system, if there's no reason to not include it, we do make sure priority date is a mandatory issue for us. That's why in this case, California is a little sparse at this time. We've gone through 3 different data sets with our California representations, and we continue to make those efforts to coordinate with them on how we can fit their data best into our system. That gets into doing weekly reviews of what is currently working, what is not, and doing updates from our staging environment after it's been evaluated and pushing to our live service here.
So Ryan, just wanted to make sure, Ryan, that I think you said you had answered the first question. Can you discuss differences between the data you collect and existing data at the state USGS and EPA data sets?
Sure. So the data we work with is all state-sponsored data. We work with where the data that is coming specifically from the state services. So we're pulling data strictly from the Montana Water Right Associations, the Idaho Water Right Association, things like that. The USGS and EPA data are partnered with us on that National Linked Index project, but just because all that information in the end is geo-referenced site data. There's a latitude, there's a longitude, and there are now online tools available between our coordination to filter through all recognized, in our case, water right sites and USGS gauge sites and EPA water quality sites. And now it's all one download through multiple services.
Great, thank you for that. And then there is a specific question here. If it's possible to select sites based on HUC by UGS, or the hydrologic unit code.
We do try to track information at this point at a HUC level 8 and a HUC level 12. We're not showing that feature here. In our case, we like the states themselves to make that identification, just because we're working with the state's data and we want to make sure that we're using the data to the best of our abilities, their data. So if they've made the connections with a HUC like that, we do our best to map that into the Wade system. We're not showing that feature at this time because that is not always accessible with the state's live data. That also gets into recognizing geo-referenced area. We have a couple just blank ones filled here, highly anticipated values, with the intention of expanding upon this idea of different levels of polygonal selection, essentially, in this case, HUC 8 or HUC 12, or even going further on that.
Right. Thanks, Ryan. Another question from Ben, who says he's excited by the summary of the total allocated annual volumes. If you're going to get excited about something, it's got to be that. Are all of the allocated volume values taken directly from state data, or does WestDAAT perform a calculation such as from duty and acreage for irrigation?
It is taken directly from the record itself. We do try to track duty information like that, but that is a separate value, which we are not showing at this time.
Ryan, I'm not sure if I understood it differently. I wanted to clarify, and I added a link to how the aggregation tool works, and there's some limitations there. So we add up those fields that the state provided, and there are limitations. So please pay attention to those, because there are some really big differences in how the states record those.
Sure, no known issues of trying to force a water right to be a one-to-many. If the state is mapping out a water right to 10 CFS between 2 sites, how much of that 10 is going between those 2 sites? And our system may accidentally be duplicating that to 20. And we're doing our best to add exceptions to help track that at this time, but our data is only as good as what the states can provide us at this time.
Right. Another question here, and I see we also have some questions in chat that came directly to the panelists, so I will get to those. First, we're going through the Q&A. And so Ryan and Adel and Tony, if the two of you want to show your faces, and I don't know, Ryan, if you think it's best to close the screen down or keep it open in case you want to show things.
Sure.
Either way is fine.
I will just end with a quick demo, just a quick comment on here is our landing page for the WSDAAT program on the Western States Water Council website. Here will be our link to the WestDAAT service live here later today. We'll make that live here later today, sometime after the webinar.
Great. So another question to the panelists. Do you include educated water rights in California?
And that's adjudicated, I believe. Yes. Yes, we do. The simple answer.
Is there a more complicated answer?
So we've been struggling a little bit with California's water rights because, well, they're working on an amazing update to revamp the entire system. And so that's one. And two, for billing purposes, they estimated the face value of a water right, and that face value, it's a volume, an annual volume. I think it's for billing purposes, but we initially used it, but we showed some massive numbers. And so we took it down and we went back to the flow rate based ones, and we're still having some issues with mapping that data, and we're continuing to work with them.
I think,
Go ahead.
as you mentioned, the issue of flow, some of the rights include a flow allowance, but then it's really only used seasonally, not year round. And if you add those up, it can be some astronomical numbers. If you look at the posted water rights for the Imperial Valley or the Coachella Valley, the potential diversions are more than the current flow of the Colorado River. So obviously, there's some work that needs to be done there. And I think, as Ryan mentioned, we've worked with as many as 3 different data sets. And as Otto pointed out, California is updating the data provided by the State Water Resources Control Board as well. So once that has been completed, we will be able to upload it.
Great. Thank you. Moving on to the next question. Everyone ready? So we have a question. Have you considered adding a layer or feature showing groundwater depletion? For example, the Kansas Geological Survey has an aquifer atlas for the High Plains Ogallala, which underlays its own map of Kansas groundwater rights. This could be most useful in identifying or being able to surmise roughly how many groundwater rights are crippled, so to speak, due to declining aquifer levels.
Tony, would you like to talk about the regulatory overlay layer that we potentially could include this as part of it?
Well, yes, we have discussed not necessarily the depletions, but obviously Kansas and other areas overlying the Ogallala have established regulatory controls, either locally or at the state level. And we will be discussing actually at our meetings later next month, how best to show those regulations. We could simply add an overlay, GIS overlay, and within that area, you would know that your rights are subject to some type of regulation. We've talked about that with the river basin. I think anyone within the Colorado River Basin probably has questions about how changes may impact their water rights. So it will be possible for us to do that. One of the challenges, and Ryan might speak to it, is do we tag that to each of the individual water rights, or do we simply show the overlay and let you go to the metadata or a source to get information on what restrictions there might be to water use within that specific polygon?
Great. Moving on, thanks, Tony. Can we extract, the royal we, extract data based on the specific watershed boundary only?
So we built generic tools here, like for the for most of our users, but we understand that some users want, like, they still have specific questions. And so the API, the application programming interface, allows a geometry input. So if you pass that, any river basin geometry would allow you to retrieve water rights within it. It would require some programming skill. And I just shared a link to our API documentation. We'd appreciate if you reach out to us about the API, because there's a token protection for it. And right now we just share it on an individual by individual basis because we don't have a mechanism to support it through the user interface that we have so far.
Speaking of
plans.
API, thanks, Otto. I noticed you answered a couple of questions about API. There was one though here that asked about more detail on the API features. Is that something you can briefly touch on here now, or something you want to share with?
We could. I'm not sure. There's just so many questions. Thank you all. I'm just trying to navigate where that is.
Oh, it's in the Q&A. You don't have to navigate. That's okay. I got it. So it's just, can you provide more detail on the API features? That's all.
So generally the API works by passing, we have about 10 input parameters. You could query on an individual site or water right one at a time if you know its ID, or you could pass a polygon and ask what are the water rights within it. You could ask for a beneficial use if you're looking for ag water in an area or a state. Or I think we have a HUC support as well, if you know the HUC geometry.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on beyond the APIs. Wondering, are you currently ingesting flow data from Utah Division of Water Rights distribution stations?
Let's see, distributions, are they related directly to water rights or not? So we are sharing those distribution stations. I think we are.
I think if they're talking about they're probably points of diversion, say from a canal company. And we are including, and Ryan, I don't know that we showed that, but one of the Our Shiny apps that we have demoed and have a prototype would show state reservoir data. So it could show storage levels, could show releases, also would show stream gauges that are operated not by the USGS, but by the individual states. And similarly, any site-specific data or time series data that the states gather. We do have that capability, and we can do that at least through the Our Shiny app. It is not yet tied to the WestDAAT tool.
And Ryan, if you don't mind, we could just share the screen, not much demo there, but just share it to show what we've got there for the reservoir and stream gauge app.
Sure. Let me just share that screen.
You know, and speaking of Tony, one of the things you mentioned are these demos, and my understanding is that you and the team would be willing and happy to do demos for special requests. Is that accurate?
Yes, we'd be happy to demonstrate it. And as Adel mentioned, they are also working on the documentation and instructions to help folks use the tool.
Right.
And Ryan, if you've got that up, or while you're pulling it up, I would just answer one of the questions. As you saw in the slides, we've had a lot of philanthropic support, some federal support from EPA Exchange Network grants and U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. We are working with the Internet of Water and others towards a sustainable capability of maintaining the system. Right now, the funding that we have has been relatively short-term. Obviously, a lot of work has gone into this as well by our member agencies funded by the state. But at this point, do not have a long-term funding source. However, I think some of as Adel talked about, some of the potential benefits I think are going to be they're going to be attractive, I think, to some of our federal partners, which I think will help us as we look towards how we can support this kind of data going into the future.
Thanks, Tony. I just want to cut in here briefly. We have about 4 minutes left, but happy to stay on for as long as people want to answer questions. We just launched a post-webinar survey, so hoping that everybody fills that out just quickly as we answer these questions. We really appreciate your feedback, and we do use it to improve the webinar going forward. So wanted to move on to the next question. at least in the Q&A, and then there's an important question that we want to get to in the chat. This first question, how do you distinguish return flows and junior appropriators?
So if I may jump in here, we do not necessarily return flow, if it makes it back to the system, and then there's another point of diversion taking that water. Ryan, have you seen return flow as a water source type? It's not this explicit in the system, so it might take some digging for someone to know if that water is a return flow source or it's a natural source. Tony, do you have more?
Yeah, I think the only distinction we make is with the priority dates. And so you could find on a stream or eventually in phase 2, in addition to, the points of diversion for the state, we could include the priority date for those diversions such that you could see what water returning to the stream might or might not get further downstream. You mentioned the challenge of shepherding water, conserve water from one source to another. Great.
So one important question, I think, on all of our minds, at least on mine as well, and so I'm really happy we've got this question is, do you have a plan for maintaining this system into the future? And you touched on it, Tony, a little bit with the funding. Any thoughts about maintenance?
Well, we are looking at that. And in fact, we'll probably be looking at some interns or others that we might be able to help train on the system. And I do think that, it is at the point where it's sort of, we have built it. Now we're waiting to see who comes. I think there will be others that will be able to use the information and develop their own apps and uses. As far as commercialization, that's not something that we foresee now. We intend to keep it open and available so that people can use it. I think the support in the future will come from the states and more from government sources, as well as there continues to be interest from philanthropic interests that can see the value of having better water data for decision making, which obviously is one of the key components of the Internet of Water.
Thank you. Yes, couldn't have said that better myself. There was a question here going back a little bit to the actual data sets. Are you planning to also include well location data sets?
So I just answered that,
okay.
That well locations that are tied to water rights are already in the system, and wells that have pumpage record, they're also in the system, but through a different data type. We call it the streamed well. We call it observation site / reservoir / gauge station data.
Great.
And I might just add that, Adel, with regards to that, not just wells, but all water rights, many of them may be described as a quarter section, as opposed to a GIS point. And we had helped with some of our interns in the past, the state of Wyoming, clean up some of their databases. So the point of diversion may not be an exact location. It may be within, that quarter section, depending on the water rights.
Great. So I do want to say that it is 2 p.m. So we're at the top of the hour, at the end of the webinar. We have a couple more questions. We have a few people who are still on. So I thought we could just answer those questions as we go. But if you need to sign off, we really appreciate you joining us. Please look out for an announcement that the recording is online, both on the IOW Coalition website and on the YouTube channel, IOW YouTube channel. And I just want to thank the panelists, Western State Water Council, we have gotten quite a few comments from people specifically to the panelists and hosts about what an amazing job that you all have done, and that nobody else could have pulled this off, which I also agree with. And so kudos to all of you and everyone that participated in helping you get these data online and up in the platform. So just moving on to a couple more questions, if you four are good with that. There was somebody who asked specifically about New Mexico and Texas data sets, wondering where those are.
Yes, if people have time to stay with us here, we could show a couple of those demos, the other data types. We've been continuously working with both of the states. We love the partners there, and I'm actually attending in person the New Mexico Water Data Initiative workshop in 3 weeks. And so we're continuously working with them, and more data sets will pop up here.
I think one of the challenges with New Mexico is, as they have not adjudicated all of their rights, they have not made publicly available priority dates.
And we've made a recent update to our system that Ryan showed, where you can have a hyperlink that takes you to the state webpage. So even if New Mexico they're not yet sharing their priority date in our system, if someone goes to that webpage, they'll likely go through PDF documents and more detail. If they could dig more, hopefully that still gives them an entry point to learn more about New Mexico water rights.
And obviously in Texas, groundwater is a private property right that is not regulated by the state. So they do not have a state database for groundwater. You could go to many of the groundwater management districts and get information, but it's not something that is tracked or provided by the state.
Thank you both. Yeah, so interesting. Every state, we all, has its own kind of niches and different ways of collecting data, different types of data, and which makes this all the more complicated, as we all know. There was a comment here also. There's some few people are very interested in these different state data sets. So one person has mentioned that Washington actually has a separate well data set, different from their water right point location, and wanted to make sure that you were aware of that.
We would love to connect with you and learn more about that data set.
Let's see who wrote that. It's a KM.
Kelsey Mock. Although I'm not sure where Kelsey's from, so.
Okay. I think that those are the comment. Well, we've got lots of comments, but those I think capture most of the questions. And so, again, echoing the comments that have come in to all of you, congratulations on launching this WestDAAT platform and tool. And, we are all excited to dive in and use it. And hopefully you'll be available for questions, and wanted to just make sure, Otto, that you mentioned a few of those important activities and dates that are coming up that you will be holding in association with the launch.
Right, so stay tuned, please, to the Internet of Water Coalition newsletter and notifications. They'll be coming out, and then the social media networks as well.
Great. All right. I think we can call that a wrap. And thank you, three of you, sorry, excellent presentation. I'm looking at 4 of us, so it's kind of funny. But the 3 of you have been incredible. And yes, many congratulations on this.
Thanks, Faith. Thanks everyone who's put this together and everyone who participated.
Yeah, thank you all. Appreciate it.